It really is an honor for me to be joining you in the Central and Eastern European Summit to discuss how cities can harness the growth of technology and new economics and attract talent as a driver of urban development. The work we do at City Planning and with our partners in city government to help grow the city's economy, that work very much depends on exchanging ideas with others. And so I'm very excited to share some of the trends we've seen in New York and some of the new ideas that we're now employing to continue the next phase of the city's development in the areas of innovation and creative disruption and continued growth. But I'd like to start by taking a long look backward. This, as probably most of you know, is a map of the United States. And New York was one of the 13 original colonies, all of which were nestled on the east coast of the United States. The other 12 colonies were all settled mainly by the British, and all were established with organized and established religions. That was their ethos. New York, on the other hand, was established by a company, the Dutch East India Company, and its religion was business, and everyone was welcome. And so really from its very creation, New York's ethos was based on, essentially on talent and making money. And despite that, even for its first 150 years, including more than a quarter of a century after the United States was officially formed after its independence, New York was neither the most populous city, nor was it the business center of the new country. That was actually in Philadelphia. What changed all of that was the decision to build the Erie Canal. It brought access of goods and raw material to and from the American heartland, from the Great Lakes region up here that was just being settled, through a canal in New York, down to in upstate New York, and down to the wonderful New York harbor. And that singular investment made New York by 1840 the manufacturing center of the country, as well as the hub for exports and imports. So by the middle of the 19th century, thanks largely to infrastructure investments like the Erie Canal, New York City became the business center of the United States. And so is established pretty early on in our history the three legs of New York's economic development policy that pretty much has continued to this very day. One, diversity. Diversity in economics and diversity in demographics. Two, an emphasis on human talent. And three, the importance of infrastructure in maintaining a competitive edge. So that even by the end of World War II, New York City had more manufacturing jobs than any other city in the United States, more than cities in the industrial belt and heartland of the country that you think of as manufacturing centers like Chicago or Detroit or St. Louis. It was home to 1 million manufacturing jobs, a third of the city's employment at that time. But starting in the 1950s, manufacturing began a long decline and exodus outside the urban core. So by the 1970s, deregulation and the rapid growth of the financial sector led our economy to become much more reliant on financial services and office-based employment. And by the late 80s, financial services accounted for 500,000 jobs and nearly 20% of the city's total employment. So when the stock markets crashed in 1987, that seems like ancient history now, we experienced an extreme recession, and it was incumbent upon us at that time to re-examine our economy and see how we could change it. And in the early 1990s, actually in 1990, the city created the Economic Development Corporation, which, and I was its founding president, charged with the task of not only saving our franchise industry, financial services, but also creating opportunities to diversify the economy. So to save financial services, we provided very deep tax breaks to keep businesses and jobs. This was, I would say, at best, a stopgap measure. New York is not a low-cost place to do business, and we have learned since then that for us to be economically successful, our strategy has to be based on high quality, not low cost. So to diversify our economy, the city's broad strategy for economic development was rooted in attracting people of talent from across the country and the world to come to New York. We had to make the city an attractive place to be, and generally think of that as creating a diverse and supporting a diverse range of high-quality, varied cultural activities, the kinds of cultural activities that people of talent wanted, high-quality amenities like very high-quality, world-class open space, and recent examples that are now world-famous are the High Line and Governor's Island and the New York Harbor, nightlife, opportunities for educational and vocational advancement, and, of course, diversity of both population and economy. So the work we are doing today in New York to evolve into a 21st century city economy builds on decades and indeed centuries of work to encourage growth and diversity. Unlike some American cities, San Francisco comes to mind, which base their value proposition on limited growth, we have always seen growth and diversity as literally part of our own DNA. But we haven't always been able to deliver what we believe. I've had the privilege of serving 5 different mayors and the people of New York for almost 5 decades now. I started in the early 1970s when urban America was trying its best to address a tsunami of social changes, some great, some not so great, that at the time seemed to arise out of nowhere. The rise in crime, the drug epidemic, the sexual revolution, just to name a few. And collectively, these forces put enormous strains on city government. They added to the erosion of basic services, a major fiscal crisis in the 1970s when New York went essentially bankrupt, and a sharp drop in our population. And perhaps most significantly, they were a catalyst for the decline in the national government's commitment to urban America, and that's a trend that continues in the United States to this very day. Meanwhile, the emerging urban development policy in those years was planned shrinkage. I should go back to that. To retreat from crime-ridden abandoned neighborhoods. That is the South Bronx up there, virtually an abandoned neighborhood. Also to focus on saving central business districts and to build defensively. And one district that was in terrible shape was Times Square, a symbol of urban decay. Indeed, some of the worst architecture we live with to this day was designed to wall off the inside, those inside buildings, from the disagreeable aspects of urban life on the outside. And fortunately, over the past 4 decades, the city has dramatically changed for the better, and the changes we face today stem largely from our success, not from our failure. So the most recent Census Bureau estimates show our population surpassing 8.5 million people last year, about the size of London, the largest population in the city's history, more than twice the size of our second largest city, Los Angeles. We've added almost 400,000 people to the city just since 2010 alone, which at this pace is almost like absorbing the city of Krakow every 10 years. Our city population is higher than 40 out of the 50 United States, and 4 out of our 5 boroughs alone would each rank among the 10 largest cities in America. And for the first time in memory, more people are coming here, more people are staying here, and more people are seeing it as a great place to raise a family. But the numbers are not the only interesting part of the story. Beyond general growth in size, our population is becoming even more diverse. Over 3 million of our 8.5 million residents are foreign-born, and about 40% of them have arrived since 2000 or later. Half of all New Yorkers now speak a language other than English at home. More notably, since 2010, our Asian and Hispanic populations have dramatically increased, And that accounts for more than 80% of the city's population growth over the last 5 years. We now have about 2.5 million Hispanics in the city, more than any other city in the United States, and we're home to the largest Chinese population outside of Asia. And our diverse economy attracts people of talent from all over the world. And there's a lot of things about New York that really make it attractive, but foremost among them, I believe, is that people from all over the world can feel at home. A university that's seeking to attract, for example, a Sri Lankan professor can point to our growing Sri Lankan community. And we have of 100 different nationalities, more than any other city in the world, where you could point to the same thing. And today, in a world where a company does not only have to attract one person of talent, but usually that person's partner, who in all probability is in an entirely different field and is a talent, him and herself alone, this requires not only a diverse population, but a diverse economy as well. And so as New Yorkers, we're really proud of this diversity because we believe it brings the kind of economic growth, enthusiasm, and opportunity that the city was starved for in the 1970s. And largely because of this, our economy has never been stronger either. Our jobs are at an all-time high, 4.3 million jobs in the city as of this past February. Over 250,000 jobs have been added to the city since January 2014. That's the fastest two-year growth on record, and the first time in the city's history more than 100,000 jobs were added in 2 consecutive years. Our unemployment rate is now slightly below 6%, the lowest it's been since the Great Recession of 2010, and our jobs are diversifying both across industries and where those jobs are located geographically. And as you can see from this chart, our major growth has been in accommodations and food, in professional services. That includes most of the TAMI industries, and healthcare and retail and education services. The growth has been marginal in manufacturing, but this is the first time we've seen a bump up in manufacturing in probably 4 decades. Our manufacturing population or jobs now are about 75,000 compared to 1 million right after World War II. But this growth has also brought with it a number of challenges, and including growing inequality between rich and everybody else, a persistently high poverty rate. 20% of New York's population is poor, and an additional 20% are near poor. The needle has not moved much in decades with respect to those percentages. And all of this has led to a very, very serious housing affordability crisis. A growing population now competing for supply of housing that simply is not growing as quickly. And as a result, rents are rising faster than incomes for most, making it even harder for low and moderate income New Yorkers to find affordable housing. There is a shortfall of probably 500,000 units of housing between households that can afford, especially low and extremely low income households that can afford housing, and the housing units that they would find affordable. 55% of renter households, and New York City is a renter city, 2/3 of our households rent, don't own, are rent burdened, which means that they're spending at least 1/3 of their income on rent, and 1/3 of household income of renter households are extremely rent burdened, which means they're spending at least half of their household income on rent. And in centrally located neighborhoods with strong access to jobs and other amenities, incomes are rising with rents rising much, much faster. And even in neighborhoods where incomes are not rising, rents are rising quickly. And in New York, in a civilized society, this is really unacceptable. 55,000 people are sleeping in the city's homeless shelters every night. Now, this growth exacerbates the pressure on the city's dense but aging infrastructure as well, and on our transportation system. And even though a good metric is that our subway ridership is at its highest since 1948, particularly now during off-peak hours, the system is not in a state of good repair. And beyond simply capacity, the city and region's transportation infrastructure remains vulnerable to threats of climate change, because we are very much a coastal city. And more people than ever before, therefore, need affordable homes and career-building jobs in growing, innovative sectors so that New Yorkers from across the economic spectrum can benefit from the city's success. So how did we get from the recession of the 90s to the position we're in today? First, of course, I can't emphasize enough the importance of reducing crime, a major problem in the US, less so, I think, here in Europe. In 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, through both innovative policing with emphasis on serious crime, but also on quality of life crimes and perceptions of crimes, increasing the number of police, use of land use and development to reduce crimes, and the best examples of that are Times Square and the South Bronx. I'll get to them in a minute. New York really went from being the most dangerous large city in America to the safest large city in America. And unlike in the period from after the post-war period from the 1950s to the 1970s, when we really failed to see early enough the rapid transformation from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, in 1990 we did see the coming innovation economy. And we saw that innovation, tech, internet investment was largely then on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, then the center for hardware, software, venture capital. But the industries that relied on that West Coast technology were located in New York, and they were our key industries: finance, media, entertainment, advertising, health. The content was in New York, but the technology and the technology innovation was elsewhere, and that became a major threat to our economy. And even in those years, many startup companies had to be in New York, and we tried at the outset to create a competitive Silicon Alley to compete with Silicon Valley. And some of it was successful, but most of these companies, certainly in the 90s, were flash in the pans, were swallowed up in the dot-com boom, and even if they weren't, were in those years mainly sales offices as opposed to centers for innovation. That did change with Google, which always had somewhat of a footprint in New York as a sales office, but it didn't really start growing until the late 1990s or right after 2000, when it bought this older, nondescript office building, but transformed the inside into what is really amazing space. And I think this is a lesson about this industry generally, is the opportunity that it offers to take older space that one thought would never be useful again, manufacturing space, older office space, and see it transformed into the kind of space that the companies of the new economy really want to see. But despite the overall talent in New York, our major businesses told us they still were not able to compete with Silicon Valley in growing and attracting a certain kind of talent that was essential, and that was high-quality, high-talent engineers. So the city designed a competition to create a world-class school that would produce world-class engineering talent. It offered $100 million and free land anywhere in the city if a high-quality school would come. And it had its eyes set on Stanford. And second, had its eyes set on Carnegie Mellon, because Carnegie Mellon and Stanford were both producing spin-off businesses as well as engineers. And when it did this, it was a very brave move for New York City, because not surprisingly, the schools and the high-quality schools that existed in New York at that time still do. Columbia University, New York University, the City University system, all extraordinarily good schools. You can imagine were pretty upset to see the city offering $100 million in free land to a newcomer when these schools were desperate for money as well. And these were not shabby schools, but there was a recognition that New York really had to go for the #1 and close to number one as best you could do in terms of creating the kind of environment that could produce the kind of talent, homegrown, that could then attract similar talent from around the world to fuel the new economy. And the winner ultimately was Cornell University and Technion as a joint venture, Technion, the Israeli school. They decided to build a new campus on Roosevelt Island. This is especially pleasing to me because Cornell University is my alma mater and Roosevelt Island is where I live, so it was particularly nice as far as I was concerned. And for those of you who don't know New York, Roosevelt Island is located in the middle of the East River, which is about a 2-minute ride from the Central Business District by aerial tram or by subway. So it has its own campus, but extremely close to the Central Business District. And this campus, which is now almost completed, won't open officially until next year, but is already operating as a school, is housed in Google Space, and has already spun off, without it even opening yet, 50 new businesses. So what are we doing looking forward? We have, I'd say, a 4-part strategy on how we address the new economy. First, modernize our space, how do we provide 21st century office space and 21st century job opportunities. Second, decentralize so that we can take advantage or reduce the stress on our infrastructure and take advantage of space all over the city, and to capitalize on trends that new companies want to be in other parts of the city. Third, integrate, look at how our traditional industrial and manufacturing jobs, and as I said, our manufacturing jobs have just slightly started growing for the first time in decades, can coexist with other commercial businesses, and how we can use and cross-subsidize other commercial businesses to support manufacturing. And finally, adapt, which is the adaptive reuse of traditional manufacturing buildings into mixed-use, innovative campuses, which include technology and advanced manufacturing jobs. So first, in terms of modernizing. East Midtown, which is the area around Grand Central Station, the core of our office district, is home to 70 million square feet of office space, 250,000 jobs, and it's a major tax base and regional transportation hub. But there's been a limit on new office development. Less than 5% of the office stock there has been constructed during the past 2 decades. Only 2 mid-sized buildings in the last decade, and the average age of office buildings there is 75 years old. So what we've done is incentivize developers adjacent to Grand Central Station. You can see Grand Central Station sort of nestled right there. Along that corridor, we have rezoned the area to allow for much higher density, actually twice as much density. Those of you who are land use freaks know from floor area ratios, and the density has been increased from 15 FAR to 30 FAR, so twice the density that otherwise had been permitted. And in exchange for that, we've required the developers to make major improvements in the public realm, transportation, and particularly into the Grand Central Station regional transit system. So the first project, 1 Vanderbilt, was approved last year. It will produce a 1.3 million square foot office building on this site. And in return for that, the developer will put $200 million of its own money into the public realm and station area improvements. We've also created a whole new office district in West Midtown called Hudson Yards, with its first building opening this week. And of course, after the tragedy of 9/11, we have totally rebuilt the World Trade Center with 2 of its buildings now complete and 2 more under construction. Through the past several years, Manhattan has seen the greatest employment growth in our traditional Midtown Central business districts, but we're seeing a much higher rate of growth in percentage terms in our other boroughs, and particularly in North Brooklyn, right here, and in Queens. So right along this waterfront, and you can see that's Roosevelt Island. So that Roosevelt Island is attracting talent and people who live in Manhattan, but is spinning off jobs that are going to go into the lower cost area of Queens. So it's a particularly strategic location with good transportation in both directions. And the increase in employment and jobs in outside of Manhattan has been a reflection in part of the growth in population in the boroughs outside of Manhattan, and in part it's because many of the companies we're seeking to attract and helping to grow want different kinds of spaces, and most importantly, we see an increased desire for people to work near where they live. So as people increasingly move to this east of Manhattan waterfront, we are seeing major innovation companies sprouting up there and growing there. And for us, this is particularly important because it reduces the stress on our very overstressed transportation system. We're also looking now at new and innovative ways to subsidize new industrial and manufacturing development. This is a project the City Planning Commission just approved last week in Brooklyn. It is a 480,000 square foot building in an industrial area, but this building, in order to build to 480,000 square feet and to waive the parking requirements that otherwise would be required, is required to devote about a fifth, 100,000 of that 480,000 square feet to manufacturing. It can't use it for office space. So the goal is to see the office space, which is highly profitable, subsidize the manufacturing space, which is new manufacturing space, which is clearly not profitable, at least not ground-up development. In areas like Brooklyn, we are also adapting older buildings. This is the Brooklyn Navy Yard, one of the great shipyards of World War II. It was abandoned after the war. This entire complex is now being managed by a subsidiary of the city, and it is the center for manufacturing jobs, innovative jobs, movies, and a whole variety of green and sustainable development. And speaking of sustainability, we have to ensure that these businesses, many of which are located on our waterfront and in vulnerable areas, can adapt to the impacts of climate change, a major issue for coastal cities like New York, where sea rise is inevitable. So we're doing undertaking a variety of initiatives to assess vulnerability to flooding in industrial areas, and have proposed strategies that individual businesses and the city can pursue to make industrial areas and surrounding communities much more resilient. But economic development policy alone is not going to address the city's problems. If we are and challenges. If we are continue on this trajectory, we must become an even denser city to absorb and accommodate more growth. We understand that neighborhoods throughout the city are very wary of change and density, but we do believe that density has many pluses for a neighborhood, and we need the ability to build more affordable housing. So 2 years ago, Mayor de Blasio released a bold housing plan with the goal of building or preserving 200,000 units of high-quality, affordable housing to meet the needs of more than 500,000 people over the next 10 years, 8 more years to go. We devoted $8 billion in capital just to subsidize the construction of affordable housing in our 10-year capital plan. That's double the commitment of the previous 10 years. That's already financed more than 40,000 units of housing since January 2014, and in 2015, more than 21,000 units of housing were financed, which is the most in the city's history. We've created, in addition to the $8 billion in just to subsidize affordable housing, an additional $1 billion just to invest in public investments needed in areas that are becoming more dense. So as we increase density, part of the wariness of density has been the fear of neighborhoods that public services will be overwhelmed, that open space won't be there, that new schools won't be there, that new roads and better roads won't be provided. So, and for some good reasons, communities had reason to be concerned about it because past promises have not always been kept. So what the city decided to do is reserve $1 billion just for investment in those neighborhoods that are getting increased density. And we've also enacted just a couple of months ago at City Planning a mandatory inclusionary housing program, which now requires that any time a developer builds in any neighborhood that we create, or any site that we create increased housing capacity, 25 to 30% of the housing that gets built by that developer must be affordable forever. And it's the most rigorous such program in the United States. We have to bring jobs, we have to improve our infrastructure. We need more innovative models. The City of New York does not run the local transportation system, the subway or bus system. That's run by the state of New York. But the city, in order to improve the system and also to have its priorities recognized, has in an unprecedented way provided to the state, effectively, $2.5 billion over the next 5 years just for mass transit and to help improve the city's mass transit system, both to a state of good repair and for expansion. And we have to look at new modes of transit in areas where the jobs are increasing. So we're expanding ferry service in areas that aren't part of the subway network. We are looking at a Brooklyn-Queens connector, a light rail system to go along that Queens-Brooklyn waterfront, because historically our transit network all fed into Manhattan. We have a hub and spoke system. We're promoting bicycle usage, which we're probably far behind most cities in Europe on, but we've just completed our 1,000th mile of bike lanes. And we are also, in terms of broadband, in terms of infrastructure, investing heavily in broadband. But we also recognize that our approach to economic development and to the regions and to our own sustainability require looking beyond our borders. It was not very long ago that the city viewed its relationship with the region as basically a zero-sum game. We saw ourselves in competition with the region. When we lost a job or position to the suburbs, the loss was seen as a net loss for the city. When we gained a person or a job from the suburbs, that was seen as a net gain and cause for celebration. But times and circumstances have really changed. The city's population and jobs are at an all-time high, as I mentioned. The rest of the region is stagnant. And this weakness in the rest of the region now is, in my view, actually a constraint on our overall continued growth and our quality of life. So in order to be truly competitive in an increasingly competitive world economy, not only New York City, but the entire region has to thrive. And so the bottom line for us is that we see the region and the city as mutually dependent on each other. And so we've established now a regional planning unit at City Planning to work and plan more closely with our neighbors in the surrounding suburbs. And as far as I know, this is the first time in the United States that the city government has established a regional planning division within its own government. So to the extent that affordable housing is available elsewhere in the region, it helps relieve the pressure on our residents, as well as helps the region thrive. And perhaps most importantly, if we can improve transit connectivity both within the city and throughout the region, it will expand economic opportunities for all. For example, we continue to see increases in people living in the city, commuting to jobs outside the city, people living in the suburbs commuting to jobs within the city, but actually city residents are now commuting to jobs outside the city at a faster rate even than we're seeing increases in migration. So clearly we all benefit from greater regional cooperation. So we live in a period of extraordinary change, and this is just touching on some of the issues, challenges, successes, and failures that we have. We've been through a lot before: our insecurity, our depression, the influx of new immigrants from all over the world, workers fighting for fair deals, movements to expand civil rights, and each time there's been some doubt about whether we can overcome those challenges, but each time we have, and we have made change work for us, and we think change is good for us, always extending New York City's promise outward to the next frontier, and probably emerging stronger and better than before each time. And we look no further than the recovery of Lower Manhattan, which was, as you know, devastated less than 15 years ago. And today it is more varied, more thriving, more powerful, more exciting than it's ever been. And I think that's the tale of New York. And so with that, I will stop. Thank you.